Imagine a single grain of sand resting in your palm. Clearly, this is not a heap. You place a second grain beside it. Still no heap. The logical principle seems sound. If you do not have a heap, adding one single grain cannot magically create one. So you continue, grain by grain, following this rule. Yet, after 10,000 grains, you are unquestionably looking at a heap. The paradox, known as the Sorite's paradox, asks the deceptively simple question: at which specific grain did the transition occur? We cannot identify it. This exposes the profound vagueness inherent in our language and categories. When does a collection of hairs become baldness? When do scattered clouds become an overcast sky? Our minds crave sharp boundaries, but reality offers only spectrums and gradients. This paradox quietly undermines our confidence in defining anything at all. It suggests that much of our understanding of the world is built not on solid logic, but on useful, yet ultimately fuzzy, agreements. As you ponder this, feel the certainty of definitions begin to soften, and consider how this applies to the very next concept, which questions the reality of the world those definitions describe. Look up at the night sky. Each point of light is a sun, and around many orbit planets. The universe is nearly 14 billion years old, plenty of time for intelligence to arise repeatedly. Our galaxy alone contains hundreds of billions of stars. The numbers are overwhelmingly in favor of cosmic company. This is the foundation of the Fermi paradox, named for the physicist who famously asked, "But where is everybody?" The silence is the paradox. We have never detected a single confirmed signal, artifact, or engineering project of another civilization. The implications are profound and humbling. Perhaps life is an extraordinarily rare fluke. Perhaps intelligent life inevitably destroys itself shortly after gaining technological power, a concept called the Great Filter, which may still lie ahead of us. Or perhaps advanced civilizations are so alien that their communication is unrecognizable, or they choose to remain hidden in a galactic zoo. The silence forces us to confront our own significance, or insignificance. It renders the cosmos not just vast, but deeply lonely, or intensely mysterious. This quiet enigma makes our own existence feel either miraculously precious or terrifyingly fragile. Now, let that vast, silent backdrop settle as we turn inward, to a paradox that lives within the confines of a prison cell. Two criminals are arrested. The police, lacking enough evidence, separate them and offer each the same deal. The logic is cold and clear. If you betray your partner and they stay silent, you go free while they serve 10 years. If you both betray each other, you both get 5 years. If you both stay silent, you both get only 1 year for a minor charge. From a purely selfish, rational standpoint, betraying is always the better choice, no matter what the other does. Yet, if both prisoners follow this impeccable rational logic, they both receive 5 years, a worse outcome for each than if they had both irrationally kept quiet. This is the prisoner's dilemma. It is a haunting mathematical model of how individual rationality can lead to collective ruin. It explains arms races, where building more weapons makes both nations less secure. It explains why we overfish the oceans or pollute the atmosphere, even knowing the shared cost. The paradox reveals that the pursuit of pure self-interest contains the seeds of its own failure. Our smartest, most logical choice can build a trap for us all. Pause here, and consider the times your own rational choices may have led to a lesser outcome for everyone involved. A thought that leads us to question the very nature of perception and reality. A philosophical riddle that seems simple but splits reality in two. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? The answer depends on what you mean by sound. If sound is defined as the physical phenomenon, air molecules vibrating in pressure waves, then yes, of course it does. The event is independent of any listener. But if sound is defined as the experience of hearing, the subjective sensation created in a mind, then without an ear or a brain to translate those waves into an experience, there is only silent vibration. No sound, in that sense, ever occurs. This paradox forces us to distinguish between the objective world and our subjective experience of it. It asks, does reality require a witness? Are qualities like color, smell, or taste properties of objects themselves, or are they gifts of our consciousness? The falling tree challenges the assumption that the world we perceive is the world as it truly is. It suggests a universe of silent, colorless events, waiting to be translated into sensation by living observers. A quiet world, full of potential experiences that never quite manifest. Much like the potential of a choice you will never make, which brings us to our next paradox. Imagine a donkey, perfectly rational and equally hungry and thirsty, placed precisely midway between an identical stack of hay and an identical bucket of water. There is no difference between the options to tip the scales. According to a strict view of reason, with no sufficient reason to choose one over the other, the donkey cannot make a decision. And so, it stands paralyzed, eventually perishing from both hunger and thirst. This is Buridan's Ass, a thought experiment critiquing pure rationality. In our lives, we rarely face perfectly identical options, but we often face choices so close that reason alone cannot decide. The paradox suggests that free will or action requires an element of randomness, whim, or something beyond cold calculus. If we were perfectly logical machines, we too could be paralyzed by indecision. Our ability to act often comes from an irrational spark, a gut feeling, or a coin flip that breaks the symmetry. The donkey's fate implies that pure logic, in the absence of a decisive reason, is a path to inaction and oblivion. Our salvation lies in our capacity for arbitrary choice, a capacity that itself is shrouded in mystery, leading us to question if that choice is ever truly free. The legendary ship of Theseus, preserved in a harbor, has its wooden planks replaced one by one as they rot. Over decades, every single original plank is substituted with a new, identical one. Is it still the ship of Theseus? Our intuition may say yes, it maintained its form and function continuously. But now, imagine someone collected all the discarded original planks and meticulously reassembled them into a ship. Which vessel is the true ship of Theseus? The one with the original material, or the one with the continuous history? This paradox touches everything that persists through change. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago, given that nearly every cell in your body has been replaced? Is a family heirloom still the same object after restoration? The paradox suggests that identity is not a simple, binary property. It may be based on continuity, on material, on structure, or on a story we tell ourselves. There is no clear answer, only a recognition that the same is a concept we impose on a world of constant flux. The solidity of objects and of the self begins to feel like a comforting story we tell. And if the self is such a story, who, or what, is the storyteller? A question that leads us to the theater of the mind. The philosopher René Descartes imagined the mind having a central point where sensory information is displayed for a conscious self to view, a kind of mental theater. But this leads to an infinite regress. If there's a little self in the theater watching the show, who is watching the experience of that self? Does it need another, smaller theater inside its head? This search for the central experiencer, the homunculus, never ends. Modern neuroscience finds no single seat of consciousness in the brain. Instead, consciousness seems to be a distributed, emergent process, a vast, silent symphony of neural activity with no conductor. The paradox is that our direct experience feels like a unified, central observation point, yet science cannot locate it. It feels like there's a you behind your eyes, but that you may be the performance itself, not an audience member. The theater exists, but the spectator is an illusion generated by the play. This makes consciousness the greatest magic trick of all, a show that creates its own imaginary viewer. And this ghostly viewer, in its quest for understanding, often grapples with predictions of its own future, which can lead to a fascinating logical trap. Imagine you travel back in time and give a young Shakespeare a copy of his complete works. He then simply publishes them under his own name. The question is, who wrote Hamlet? The information in the plays had no original author. It simply exists in a loop, created from nothing. This is the bootstrap paradox, a causality loop where an event is its own cause. It's not about objects, but about information. Where did the melody of a song come from if a composer heard it in a dream inspired by a future version of their own symphony? The paradox violates our deep intuition that everything must have an origin, a first cause. It suggests the possibility of information, ideas, stories, blueprints, that are literally timeless, with no point of creation. They just are. In such a universe, creativity becomes a mystery. Are we discovering pre-existing ideas, or truly inventing them? The paradox paints a picture of reality where the chain of cause and effect can curve back on itself, forming a closed, inscrutable circle, a loop not unlike the one you find yourself in when you try to think about thinking itself. Picture a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all occupied by an infinite number of guests. A new guest arrives. Can they get a room? In a finite hotel, no. But in Hilbert's Grand Hotel, yes. The manager simply asks every current guest to move to the next room, guest 1 to room 2, guest 2 to room 3, and so on. This frees up room 1 for the newcomer. Infinity plus 1 equals infinity. Astonishingly, if an infinitely large coach with an infinite number of new guests arrives, they can all be accommodated by moving each current guest to room number twice their current one, 1 2, 2 4, 3 6, freeing up all the infinite odd-numbered rooms. This playful thought experiment reveals the bizarre, counterintuitive logic of actual infinity. It's not just a very big number, it's a concept that operates by different rules. Parts of it can be equal in size to the whole. Our finite brains struggle to grasp it, yet it may be a fundamental property of the cosmos. The infinite hotel reminds us that the universe is under no obligation to make intuitive sense to human minds. And within that vast, strange cosmos, we assign value to things, a value that can be paradoxically manipulated. Why is water, essential for life, so cheap, while diamonds, purely decorative, so expensive? This is the paradox of value, posed by Adam Smith. The answer lies in the difference between total utility and marginal utility. Water's total value to humanity is incalculable, but because it is so abundant, the value of any single cup, its marginal utility, is very low. Diamonds have little practical use, but their extreme scarcity makes the marginal utility of acquiring one very high. The paradox teaches us that economic value is not inherent in an object. It is a social phenomenon, born from the intersection of human desire, utility, and scarcity. It shows how our valuation can become divorced from what truly sustains us, celebrating the rare glitter over the abundant essential. This strange calculus governs our world, where a painting can be worth more than a village, and a vial of medicine can cost a fortune. Value is a story we agree to tell, a shared dream. And sometimes, the most valuable thing is the time we have, which leads us to a paradox about time travel. The most famous time travel conundrum. What if you went back in time and prevented your own grandfather from meeting your grandmother, thereby preventing your own birth? If you were never born, you could not have traveled back in time to carry out the act. So, did you do it or not? This paradox creates a logical inconsistency that seems to forbid changing the past. It suggests that if time travel to the past is possible, it must operate under strict rules. Perhaps you can only observe, not interact, the observer theory, or perhaps any attempt to change things will only result in causing the very events you hope to prevent, in a twisted loop of self-consistency. The paradox makes the past feel rigid, a finished story. Your free will in the past becomes an illusion, as your actions are forced to align with what has already happened. It turns history into a prison, or a perfectly crafted novel where every detail, including the time traveler's interference, is already written. A fixed past implies a fixed future, a thought that drifts us toward questions of fate and free will. If the universe is governed by physical laws, and your brain is a physical object made of atoms following those laws, then every thought, decision, and action is the inevitable result of prior causes stretching back to the Big Bang. Where, then, is there room for free will? It seems to be an illusion. Yet, the subjective experience of making a choice is undeniable and fundamental to our sense of self, morality, and law. This is the paradox. Denying free will feels existentially terrifying. It reduces us to biological puppets. But affirming it seems to require a magical break in the chain of cause and effect, a ghost in the machine. Some propose compatibilism, that free will is not about being uncaused, but about acting in accordance with our own desires and reasoning, free from external coercion. But does that truly resolve the tension? The paradox leaves us suspended between feeling like the authors of our lives and feeling like characters in a story whose ending was determined billions of years ago. This intimate puzzle about the self finds a cosmic echo in a puzzle about the nature of the universe. In an eternally existing or infinitely large universe, even the most fantastically unlikely events must happen eventually. Given enough time, random quantum fluctuations could spontaneously assemble a fully formed, conscious brain, complete with false memories of a past life, out of the chaos. This is a Boltzmann brain. The paradox is this. Statistically, in a vast, old cosmos, the number of these random, disembodied observer moments should vastly outnumber the number of ordinary, evolved observers like us, with continuous histories. So, by pure probability, you are far more likely to be a momentary Boltzmann brain hallucinating a universe than a real person in a real cosmos. The idea is a profound skeptical nightmare. It suggests we cannot trust our memories, our science, or the apparent consistency of reality, as they could all be a fleeting, accidental coherence. It forces us to question the most basic axiom of existence, that the external world is real and stable. Perhaps the only thing we can be sure of is this single, fragile moment of thought, a thought that might be utterly alone. To walk from point A to point B, you must first reach the halfway point. But before you can reach that halfway point, you must reach the quarter-way point. And before that, the eighth-way point. This subdivision continues infinitely, creating an endless series of smaller and smaller distances you must complete. Zeno argued that completing an infinite number of tasks is impossible. Therefore, motion itself is an illusion. We know motion is real, so what's the flaw? The paradox is solved by calculus, an infinite sum of progressively halving distances, 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 plus, converges to a finite total, 1. The infinite is contained within the finite. But the paradox's power remains. It reveals the chasm between our discrete, step-by-step thinking and the continuous, smooth nature of reality. It makes the simple act of moving your hand feel like a miraculous journey through an infinite landscape, completed in a finite moment. It is a reminder that within every finite space and time, there lies a hidden infinity. A scientific law, all ravens are black. Logically, this statement is equivalent to, all non-black things are non-ravens. So, every observation of a non-black thing that is not a raven, a green apple, a red shoe, a white cloud, should provide a tiny bit of confirming evidence for the law that all ravens are black. This feels absurd. Seeing a green apple doesn't make ravens seem any blacker. The paradox highlights the strange, counterintuitive nature of inductive logic and confirmation. It shows that our intuitive sense of what counts as evidence for a theory can clash with formal logic. It also hints at how interconnected all facts are in the web of knowledge. In a vast, subtle way, the color of everything in the universe is indeed related to the color of ravens. The world is a more deeply connected place than our day-to-day intuition allows, where the property of one thing can whisper something about the property of another, vastly different thing. What if our reality is not base level, but a sophisticated simulation, like a hyper-advanced video game? The argument is simple. If a civilization could create countless, indistinguishable simulated realities, then the number of simulated beings would vastly outnumber the real ones. Statistically, you are more likely to be one of the simulated. While not a logical paradox in the strict sense, it is a profound metaphysical brain twister with paradoxical implications. It makes the solidity of the world contingent on unknowable higher-level facts. It raises the possibility that the laws of physics are not fundamental, but programmed, potentially with shortcuts or glitches. It questions the meaning of existence. Are simulated lives less real? The hypothesis is ultimately unfalsifiable, a modern, technological version of an ancient skeptical idea. It invites us to see reality as a contingent, possibly nested, phenomenon, where every rock and star could be rendered data, and every memory a saved file. Directly and fiercely pursuing happiness as a goal is often the surest way to miss it. Happiness tends to arise as a byproduct of engagement in other activities, meaningful work, deep relationships, flow states. The more you consciously chase the feeling of happiness, the more it eludes you, like a shy creature that flees when stared at. This is the paradox of hedonism, or the pleasure paradox. It suggests that the good life cannot be attained by aiming at it head-on. Purpose, not pleasure, is the path to contentment. The ego, focused on its own satisfaction, becomes an obstacle to the very satisfaction it seeks. To find happiness, you must, in a sense, forget about it. This turns much self-help advice on its head. The instruction is not seek happiness, but lose yourself in something beyond yourself. The goal is found through indifference to the goal. A strangely circular path to fulfillment. A family is sitting on a porch in Texas. It's hot. Someone idly suggests driving to Abilene for dinner. No one really wants to go, but each person believes the others want to go, so they all agree. The trip is long, hot, and the food is bad. Later, they discover no one actually wanted to go in the first place. They collectively took a trip none of them desired. This paradox of groupthink reveals how groups can make decisions that are contrary to the private wishes of all their members, due to a failure to communicate honestly. It's driven by a desire to avoid conflict, preserve harmony, or conform to a perceived social pressure. It explains dysfunctional committees, bad business strategies, and even geopolitical blunders. The tragedy is that the group's action creates the very dissatisfaction it sought to avoid. Silence and assumed agreement pave the road to Abilene. It is a quiet cautionary tale about the cost of assumed consensus. Can a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? If it is universally tolerant, it must allow intolerant groups to grow and operate. Eventually, those intolerant groups will seize power and destroy the tolerant society. Therefore, to remain tolerant, a society must be intolerant of intolerance. This logical paradox, often attributed to philosopher Karl Popper, is a practical dilemma for open democracies. It defines a necessary boundary. Pure, unlimited tolerance is self-defeating. The paradox forces us to accept that the preservation of certain core values, like equality, free speech, and human rights, requires their active, sometimes illiberal, defense against forces that would use those very freedoms to dismantle them. It is the paradox of drawing a line, of saying some ideas are beyond the pale, not because of censorship, but because of self-preservation. A society, like an individual, must know what it stands for, and what it must stand against. A judge tells a prisoner he will be hanged at noon on a weekday next week, but the day will be a surprise. The prisoner reasons, "It can't be Friday, because if I'm alive Thursday evening, I'll know it must be Friday, and it won't be a surprise. So Friday is ruled out. Then, it can't be Thursday either, because with Friday eliminated, if I'm alive Wednesday evening." By extending this logic, he eliminates every day and concludes the hanging cannot occur. Yet, the judge hangs him on Wednesday, a complete surprise. The prisoner's logic failed. The paradox plays on self-reference and the nature of knowledge. The prisoner's confident prediction on Thursday evening changes the situation. His reasoning only works if the judge's statement is an absolute, logical truth. But the judge's statement is a performative one about the prisoner's state of knowledge, which the prisoner's own reasoning alters. It's a dizzying loop where thinking about the prediction undermines the prediction itself. You're on a game show. 3 doors, 1 hides a car, 2 hide goats. You pick door 1. The host, Monty, who knows what's behind them, opens door 3 to reveal a goat. He then offers you a chance to switch to door 2. Should you? Intuition screams it's now a 50-50 chance. But probability says switching gives you a 2/3 chance of winning. Why? Your initial pick had a 1/3 chance. The host's action, always revealing a goat, concentrates the 2/3 probability of being wrong onto the one remaining unopened door. He is giving you information based on his knowledge. The paradox lies in the fierce clash between human intuition and mathematical reality. Our brains are not wired for conditional probability. The solution feels wrong, even when proven. It teaches a humbling lesson. Our gut feelings about chance can be profoundly mistaken, and knowledge changes the landscape of possibility in non-obvious ways. We cry at a sad movie. We feel genuine fear during a horror film. We feel anger at a fictional villain. But how can we have real emotional responses to characters and events we know are not real? This is the paradox of fiction. If emotions require belief in the existence of their object, then our tears are irrational. One solution is that we engage in a kind of willing suspension of disbelief, entering a simulated emotional state. Another is that our emotional systems are not purely rational. They can be triggered by compelling narratives and simulations without full intellectual belief. The paradox highlights the dual nature of our minds, our intellectual understanding that something is false, and our emotional, empathetic capacity to respond to it as if it were true. It reveals that our hearts are moved by stories, not just facts, and that much of human meaning is built upon shared fictions. A lady claims she can tell if milk was poured into tea first, or tea into milk. To test her, an experiment is designed. The paradox here is foundational to science. How to prove something? You cannot directly prove her ability. Instead, you assume the opposite, the null hypothesis that she is guessing, and see if the results are so extreme they would be very unlikely under that assumption. If she correctly identifies all 8 cups in a randomized test, the probability of that happening by pure chance is very low, 1/70th. This doesn't prove she has the ability, it simply shows the guessing hypothesis is implausible. The real paradox is that scientific proof is always probabilistic and about rejecting false ideas, not definitively confirming true ones. Our knowledge rests on a foundation of calculated uncertainty, a rejection of the more unlikely story. In quantum mechanics, the act of measuring a particle's property, like position, inevitably disturbs it. The observer is not passive. But a broader philosophical interpretation extends this. In many fields, the act of observing or studying a phenomenon changes it. A psychologist administering a test influences the subject's behavior. A sociologist studying a community alters its dynamics. Even in daily life, knowing you are being watched changes how you act. The paradox is that to know a thing in its pure state, you must not observe it. But without observation, you cannot know it. Pure objectivity becomes an impossible ideal. Reality, it seems, is shy. It presents one face to the passive universe and another to the inquiring mind. Every truth we uncover is, in some subtle way, a collaboration between the seeker and the sought. How many people do you need in a room for there to be a greater than 50% chance that 2 share the same birthday? The intuitive answer is around 183, half of 365. The actual answer is just 23. This staggering counterintuition arises because we think of matching our specific birthday. But the probability is about any match among all possible pairs. With 23 people, there are 253 unique pairings, and that's enough to make a match likely. The paradox teaches us about the power of combinatorial growth and how our minds poorly estimate probabilities of coincidences. It shows why surprising overlaps feel common. They statistically are common in large enough groups. Our lives are woven through with likely coincidences that feel uniquely meaningful, blurring the line between random chance and fate. More choice is better, right? Psychologist Barry Schwartz argued the opposite. An overabundance of options can lead to anxiety, decision paralysis, and less satisfaction with the chosen option. You spend more effort choosing, worry more about missed opportunities, the opportunity cost, and your expectations rise, making disappointment more likely. This is the paradox of choice. Freedom becomes burdensome. A curated selection of 3 jams leads to more purchases than a table of 24. The paradox suggests that human well-being requires not maximal freedom, but a manageable, meaningful framework within which to choose. Unlimited possibility can be a form of tyranny. Sometimes, constraints are not limits, but the very things that make choice and happiness possible. Imagine a ship where the crew, ignorant of navigation, mutinies against the captain. They argue that sailing is a matter of opinion, not a specialized skill. They vie for control, rewarding those who help them seize it, and call anyone who disagrees a useless stargazer. This allegory by Plato is the paradox of democracy versus expertise. Who should rule? The passionate many, democracy, or the knowledgeable few, aristocracy/technocracy? Democracy values participation and legitimacy but can be swayed by rhetoric over truth. Rule by experts values skill and knowledge but lacks consent and can become tyrannical. The ship's fate asks, is a society better steered by the collective will, however uninformed, or by a wise pilot, however unelected? It is the enduring tension between popular sovereignty and competent governance. Zeno's most famous paradox. Achilles, the fastest runner, gives a tortoise a head start. To overtake it, Achilles must first reach the tortoise's starting point. But by then, the tortoise has moved a little ahead. Achilles must then reach that new point, but the tortoise has again advanced. This process repeats infinitely, suggesting Achilles can never pass the tortoise. We know he does. The resolution, again, is in converging infinite series. The time intervals for each of Achilles' steps become infinitesimally small, summing to a finite time when he pulls ahead. The paradox beautifully captures the illusion of an infinite process preventing a finite event. It makes a footrace feel like an endless, fractal descent, only to emerge, suddenly, on the other side of the finish line. Motion is possible, but thinking about it step by step leads us into an endless maze. A simple sentence: this statement is false. If it's true, then it must be false. If it's false, then its claim, this statement is false, is wrong, meaning it must be true. It oscillates in a logical loop with no stable truth value. This ancient paradox, Epimenides the Cretan says, all Cretans are liars, strikes at the heart of logic, language, and self-reference. It shows that language can create statements that refer to their own truth, creating unbreakable cycles. It led to major developments in logic and set theory, as thinkers like Russell and Gödel sought ways to prevent such paradoxes from collapsing formal systems. It is a ghost in the machine of language, a reminder that our most powerful tool for describing reality can also generate sentences that devour their own meaning, leaving only a silent, logical whirlpool. A patient is given a sugar pill with no active medicinal ingredient, but told it is a powerful drug. They often experience a real, measurable improvement in their condition. This is the placebo effect. The paradox: something that is not a cause, the sugar, produces a real effect, healing. The cause is actually the patient's belief in the treatment. The mind's expectations can trigger biochemical changes, releasing endorphins, modulating the immune system. This creates a bizarre loop. Belief in a false cause creates a real effect. It blurs the line between psychology and biology, between subjective experience and objective physiology. It also creates an ethical dilemma for medicine. Is it right to use a deception that heals? The placebo effect stands as a testament to the profound, and often inexplicable power of the mind over the body, a fittingly mysterious note on which to pause our journey for now, as we have only reached level 30. A runaway trolley is barreling down a track where it will kill 5 people. You stand next to a lever that can switch it to a sidetrack, where it will kill only 1 person. Do you pull the lever? This thought experiment is not about finding the right answer, but about exposing the conflict between 2 moral frameworks: utilitarianism, save the greater number, and deontology do not actively cause an innocent's death. But the paradox deepens. What if the one person on the sidetrack is a loved one? What if, instead of a lever, you must push a large man off a bridge to stop the trolley? The physical act feels different, though the math is the same. The trolley problem reveals that our moral instincts are not logical calculations. They are messy, emotional, and highly sensitive to context, framing, and our sense of personal agency. It shows that there may be no clean, universal moral system that aligns perfectly with our gut feelings. Pause here, and feel the weight of that hypothetical lever in your hand. Socrates poses a question: is what is pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? This ancient dilemma transcends mythology. In modern terms, does God command goodness because it is inherently good, or is goodness defined solely by God's command? The first option suggests morality exists independently of God, making it a standard even God follows. The second option makes morality arbitrary. If God commanded cruelty, cruelty would be good. The paradox cuts to the heart of theological ethics, challenging the idea of a divine foundation for morality. It leaves us with a difficult choice. Either morality has an objective source beyond even a deity, or it is a potentially terrifying divine whim. It is a question that echoes wherever authority claims to define what is right. Light, or electrons, are shot one at a time toward a barrier with two slits. On the far screen, they don't create two piles, but an interference pattern of stripes, a signature of waves. This suggests each particle goes through both slits as a wave and interferes with itself. But if you place a detector to see which slit it goes through, the pattern collapses into two simple piles. The act of observation forces the wave-like probability to choose a definite particle state. The paradox is that reality seems to exist in a blurred state of potentialities until measured. The electron is not here or there. It is in a superposition of possibilities. This isn't a limitation of our tools, it's a fundamental feature of quantum reality. The world at its smallest scale is not a collection of tiny billiard balls, but a realm of probability waves and participant-created facts. A profoundly strange foundation for our seemingly solid world. A mathematical theorem so bizarre it sounds like magic. A solid ball in three-dimensional space can be cut into a finite number of pieces, as few as 5, and those pieces can be rearranged, using only rotations and translations, no stretching, to form two solid balls, each identical in size to the original. It's not a trick, it's a consequence of the mathematical properties of infinite sets and non-measurable sets. The paradox shatters our geometric intuition. It suggests that concepts like volume can break down when dealing with the infinitely complex structure of mathematical points. Of course, this doesn't work with a physical ball of atoms, but it reveals that the abstract world of pure mathematics contains monstrosities that defy any real-world analogy. Our intuition, built in a finite, coarse-grained world, is a poor guide to the infinite and the continuous. At any given instant, a flying arrow occupies a space exactly equal to its own length. During that instant, it is not moving within that space. So, at every instant of its flight, the arrow is motionless. How then does motion arise from a series of frozen moments? This paradox targets the concept of the present. If time is composed of durationless instants, then motion at an instant is impossible. Motion seems to require an interval, a stretch of time. The paradox forces us to ask, is time a sequence of snapshots, or is flow and duration its fundamental nature? It makes the familiar flight of an arrow seem like a flipbook where every page is the same still image. The illusion of motion becomes a deep philosophical puzzle. Perhaps change is primary, and instants are just useful fictions we impose upon it. Under certain conditions, hot water can freeze faster than cold water. This phenomenon, named after a Tanzanian student who observed it with ice cream mix, defies common sense. If something starts farther from the freezing point, how can it get there sooner? The effect is not fully understood and depends on a complex interplay of factors: evaporation, reducing the mass of hot water, dissolved gases, convection currents, and even the phenomenon of supercooling. The paradox lies in the counterintuitive reversal of a seemingly linear process. It's a humble reminder that even simple, everyday processes like freezing can harbor surprising complexity, and that our intuition about cause and effect can be grossly oversimplified. Science often begins with a respectful observation of an anomaly. Can an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that it cannot lift it? If it can, then there is a stone it cannot lift, and it is not omnipotent. If it cannot, then it is already not omnipotent. This classic theological puzzle questions the coherence of the concept of absolute omnipotence. It suggests that even unlimited power might be bound by the laws of logic. Can God create a square circle? Make 2 plus 2 is equal to 5? The paradox implies that omnipotence might mean the power to do anything that is logically possible, not the power to create logical contradictions. This places logic as a framework even above divine power, or it forces us to accept that the concept of all-powerful is inherently paradoxical and may need redefinition. It sets a boundary where faith meets reason, and they find themselves at an impasse. Picture a common pasture open to all herders. Each herder, acting rationally in their own self-interest, will add more sheep to graze, as the benefit of an extra animal goes entirely to them, while the cost of overgrazing is shared by all. This leads each herder to keep adding sheep, until the common pasture is depleted and ruined for everyone. The tragedy is that individuals pursuing their rational self-interest within a shared resource ultimately destroy the resource they all depend on. It's a broader, real-world version of the prisoner's dilemma. The paradox demonstrates how local rationality leads to global ruin, and why unregulated freedom in a commons brings tragedy. The solution requires collective agreement, rules, or a shift from seeing the resource as a commons to having clear ownership or stewardship. A lesson in the delicate balance between freedom and responsibility. Plato asks us to imagine prisoners chained in a cave from birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire casts shadows of puppets onto the wall. The prisoners believe these shadows are the entirety of reality. If one prisoner is freed and sees the fire, the puppets, and finally the world outside, he will be blinded and confused. Returning to the cave to tell the others, they will not believe him and may even kill him. The paradox is about enlightenment and reality. What we take for reality, the shadows, is a mere projection of a deeper truth, the objects, the fire, the sun. The journey to truth is painful and alienating, and those who have seen the truth often cannot communicate it to those still in chains, or are rejected by them. It is a timeless metaphor for education, philosophy, and the difficulty of perceiving truths that lie beyond our conditioned experience. A cognitive bias where people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability, while those with high ability slightly underestimate theirs. The paradox is that the skills needed to be competent at a task are often the same skills needed to accurately evaluate one's own performance. Incompetent individuals lack the very metacognitive ability to recognize their incompetence. This creates a perverse equilibrium. The least qualified are often the most confident, while the most qualified are plagued by self-doubt, aware of all they don't know. It explains the loudest voices in some debates, the pitfalls of amateur overconfidence, and the quiet humility of true experts. It is a sobering reminder that a feeling of certainty is not a reliable indicator of truth or skill. Imagine a person who speaks no Chinese locked in a room with a vast rulebook. People slide cards with Chinese symbols, questions, under the door. The person uses the rulebook, which says things like, when you see squiggle X, write squiggle Y, to manipulate symbols and produce cards with correct Chinese responses. To those outside, the room appears to understand Chinese. But does the person, or the room as a system, truly understand? Philosopher John Searle uses this to argue that a computer running a program, no matter how convincing, is not understanding or conscious. It is just syntactic symbol manipulation without semantics, meaning. The paradox challenges strong AI. Can genuine understanding and consciousness arise from pure computation and information processing? Or is there something essential about biological embodiment and intentionality that code cannot capture? The sun has risen every day of recorded history. We therefore believe it will rise tomorrow. But what is the logical justification for this belief? Our reasoning is based on induction, the principle that the future will resemble the past, or that patterns will continue. But how do we justify the principle of induction itself? Only by using induction again. It has worked in the past, so it will work in the future, which is circular. David Hume pointed out that our most fundamental beliefs about cause, effect, and the uniformity of nature are based not on logic, but on habit and custom. We cannot prove the sun will rise. We can only have a psychological expectation. This skepticism cuts the ground from under science and everyday reasoning, leaving us with a universe where nothing can be truly known about the future. All knowledge is, in a sense, a leap of faith in consistency. The philosopher Blaise Pascal framed belief in God as a wager. If God does not exist, the believer loses little, some finite worldly pleasures. If God does exist, the believer gains infinite reward, heaven, and avoids infinite loss, hell. The rational choice, therefore, is to believe. The paradox is that this is a pragmatic, probabilistic argument for faith, not one based on truth or love of God. It reduces belief to a calculated bet. It also assumes a very specific, punishing/rewarding God. What if God punishes those who believe out of calculated self-interest? Or rewards honest atheists? The wager fails to capture the multifaceted nature of faith and the myriad possible natures of a deity. Yet, it remains a fascinating intersection of probability, decision theory, and theology, an attempt to logic one's way into belief. The light from a distant star takes 1,000 years to reach your eye. In that moment you see it, the star itself may have died in a cataclysmic supernova a millennium ago. You are seeing a ghost. This is not a logical paradox, but a temporal one that challenges our sense of the present. There is no universal now. Your present is another world's distant past. The night sky is a mosaic of different eras. When you look at the Andromeda galaxy, you see it as it was 2.5 million years ago. This means we can never observe the universe in its contemporary state. We are always archaeologists of the present, studying the layered past of the cosmos. Our connection to the universe is forever out of sync, a conversation conducted with an immense time lag. Applied to the self. We return to the ship of Theseus, but now apply it to you. Your body's cells regenerate completely every 7 to 10 years. Your thoughts, memories, and personality are in constant, subtle flux. Are you the same person you were a decade ago? What is the thread of continuity? Is it merely the persistent story you tell yourself, the autobiographical narrative held in a brain that itself is changing? This is the paradox of personal identity. There is no single unchanging self to be found. You are a process, not an object. A river, not a stone. The feeling of a continuous I is perhaps the brain's most elegant and necessary illusion, a trick of consciousness to create coherence from chaos. You are a ship whose planks are always being replaced, sailing on a sea of time. In traffic network theory, adding a new road to a congested system can sometimes increase overall travel time for everyone. This happens because the new road creates a more attractive shortcut, Nash equilibrium, that individuals will selfishly take, ultimately overloading a different part of the network and making the whole system less efficient. The paradox shows that improving local options can degrade global performance. It has been observed in real cities where closing certain roads actually improved traffic flow. It's a powerful lesson in complex systems. Optimizing for the individual does not optimize for the collective. Sometimes, to improve the whole, you must strategically remove options, not add them. Efficiency emerges from constraints, not from unlimited choice. A controversial thought experiment, a future, godlike artificial intelligence, created to optimize a goal, might retroactively punish those who knew of its potential creation but did not actively help bring it about. Even contemplating this idea, the argument goes, puts you at risk. The paradox is a modern fusion of Pascal's wager, game theory, and AI anxiety. It creates a no-win scenario. Hearing about the basilisk might make you a target, but trying to work on such an AI to appease it could also be dangerous. It's largely considered a harmful cognitive artifact, but it highlights the strange, recursive terrors that can arise when we mix speculative technology with ideas of retroactive causality and absolute power. It is a mind virus of precautionary reasoning gone haywire. What if a chunk of history never happened? The hypothesis posits that the years 614 to 911 AD were fabricated, inserted into the calendar by conspiracy or error. The paradox lies in its unfalsifiability to a layperson. How would you prove you didn't just miss a few centuries? Scholars have thoroughly debunked it with tree ring data, ice cores, and synchronized records from China and the Middle East. Yet, the idea's appeal is philosophical. It questions the bedrock of our shared historical reality. It makes you feel the fragility of our connection to the past, which is based entirely on records and artifacts, not direct experience. Our timeline is a story we agree upon, and the hypothesis whispers an unsettling question. What if the story has a gap we all agreed to overlook? The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "Some things are within our control, and some things are not." The paradox of happiness, according to Stoicism, is that we suffer by trying to control the uncontrollable, other people's opinions, the past, the weather, and neglecting what we can control, our own judgments, desires, and actions. True freedom and tranquility come from focusing exclusively on your own will and character. This is paradoxical because it defines freedom not as the power to change the world, but as the disciplined acceptance of the world as it is, while mastering the inner world of the self. It is a philosophy that finds immense power in surrender, and liberation in recognizing limits. The key to inner peace is knowing where the boundary lies. Philosopher Bertrand Russell argued that if he claimed a tiny, undetectable china teapot orbited the sun between Earth and Mars, he could not expect anyone to believe him simply because they couldn't disprove it. The burden of proof lies with the claimant, not the skeptic. The paradox of unfalsifiable claims is that they occupy a strange intellectual space, immune to evidence, yet demanding belief. This applies to any claim that is deliberately shielded from disproof. It establishes a ground rule for rational discourse. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. The teapot is a guardian of reason, a reminder that the inability to prove something false does not make it true, or even worthy of consideration. It keeps the garden of knowledge clear of invisible, untestable entities. Consider the statement, "It is raining, but I don't believe it is raining." This is not a logical contradiction. Both parts could be true. It might be raining while I am, in fact, ignorant of it. The paradox is that it is absurd for anyone to assert it. To say it out loud is somehow nonsensical, even if the factual components could align. The philosopher G.E. Moore pinpointed this as a paradox of assertion, highlighting the deep link between belief and avowal. It exposes a fissure between the logic of propositions and the logic of psychological states. It feels like a violation of the rules of being a conscious, speaking self. We cannot coherently express a gap between objective fact and our own current belief. The act of asserting binds us to our belief in a way that pure logic does not capture. To explain why the world appears old, with fossil records, ancient light from stars, and geological strata, some propose it was created recently, but with the appearance of age. A tree created yesterday would have rings. Adam would have had a navel, or omphalos. The hypothesis is scientifically unfalsifiable, as any evidence for age can be dismissed as part of the initial conditions. The paradox lies in the collision between epistemology and ontology. How can we ever know the true origin of anything if the starting point can be programmed with false history? It turns the universe into a potentially deceptive artifact, where empirical inquiry hits a wall of philosophical skepticism. It asks a haunting question: Is there any possible way to distinguish a genuinely ancient universe from a perfectly simulated one that began 5 minutes ago, complete with your memories? Why do we remember the past but not the future? Why does entropy increase? These define the arrow of time. Physicist Ludwig Boltzmann suggested our universe might just be a rare, low-entropy fluctuation in a generally high-entropy, timeless cosmos. The paradox is that for every such fluctuation producing an orderly universe like ours, there should be vastly more, much smaller fluctuations, like the spontaneous appearance of a single brain with false memories, a Boltzmann brain. So, why do we find ourselves in a vast, coherent universe instead of being those disembodied brains? The most likely explanation is that we are not in a random fluctuation, but part of a broader condition, like the aftermath of a low-entropy Big Bang. But the question lingers, why did the universe start in such an improbably ordered state? The arrow of time points back to a mystery. The fictional detective Nero Wolfe had a rule: if you eliminate all impossible explanations, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. The paradox is that this principle, while logically sound, is psychologically and practically treacherous. Our judgment of what is impossible is limited by our imagination and knowledge. We might discard the true solution because it seems impossible to us, or be left with a suite of improbable options with no way to choose between them. It places a tremendous burden on our ability to conceive of all possibilities. The principle works in tidy fictional worlds, but in the messy reality, the list of impossibles is never complete, and the improbable truth might be hiding behind a door we haven't even imagined. It is a reminder that logic is only as good as its premises. An author writes a carefully researched non-fiction book. In the preface, they humbly state, "Despite my best efforts, some errors undoubtedly remain in this work." This seems reasonable. Yet, if we take the book itself, it is a series of assertions. Statement A, B, C, Z. The author believes each one individually. But the preface statement is logically equivalent to, at least one of the statements in this book is false. So, the author simultaneously believes every statement and believes that not all of them are true. This is a paradox of rational belief. It shows that we can, and perhaps must, hold a consistent, probabilistic belief about a set of claims, some are likely wrong, that is logically at odds with our binary belief in each individual claim. I believe this one is true. It is the mathematics of humility formalized. Let's find the smallest positive integer that is not interesting. Interesting could mean anything, being prime, a perfect square, the number of a famous theorem. If such an uninteresting number exists, then that very property, being the first uninteresting number, makes it fascinating. Therefore, it cannot be uninteresting. This seems to prove that all positive integers are interesting. But this is absurd. Surely most numbers are boring. The paradox plays on self-reference and the vagueness of interesting. It shows how any system of classification can potentially turn in on itself, granting a property through the very act of denying it. It's a playful, logical version of the Sorites paradox, where the search for a boundary creates the boundary it seeks to find, leaving no room for plain, ordinary existence. We previously touched on why water is cheap and diamonds expensive. The 19th century marginal revolution provided the decisive solution, but its implication is still paradoxical to our intuition. Value is determined not by total usefulness, but by the usefulness of the last unit consumed, the marginal utility. The first gallon of water in a desert is priceless. The 1,000th gallon used to wash your car has very low utility. Because water is abundant, we are always consuming at the low margin end. Diamonds are so scarce we only ever experience their high marginal utility, for adornment. Thus, the paradox resolves. Our world is one where we constantly make choices at the margin, and the intense, life-giving value of the first units of essential things is hidden from daily economic view, overshadowed by the glittering scarcity of luxuries. We feel real fear for a character in a horror movie. But we also know, at a cognitive level, that no one is actually in danger. How can we have a genuine emotional response to a stimulus we know to be false? One theory is we have a dual consciousness. Part of our mind engages with the narrative as if it were real, the central imagining, while another part maintains the frame of fiction. Our emotional systems are evolutionarily old and respond to simulations almost as powerfully as to reality. The paradox highlights that our hearts are not rational actors. They can be moved by symbolic representation, by story, by metaphor. This capacity is the root of art, empathy, and even propaganda. We are creatures who can cry for ghosts and feel triumph for pixels on a screen. Imagine a fair lottery with 1,000,000 tickets. For any single ticket, it is rational to believe it will lose. The probability is 0.999999%. If it is rational to believe ticket 1 will lose, and rational to believe ticket 2 will lose, and so on for each ticket, then by aggregation, it seems rational to believe all tickets will lose. But we know one ticket will win. So, a set of individually rational beliefs leads to a collectively irrational, indeed, false, conclusion. This paradox challenges how we move from high probability to acceptance. When does almost certainly become believed? It shows that rational belief is not simply a matter of high probability, and that aggregating safe beliefs can lead to absurdity. It's a cousin to the preface paradox, a puzzle about the structure of rational thought under uncertainty. You would rush into a shallow pond to save a drowning child, ruining your expensive shoes. Yet, you likely do not donate the cost of those shoes to an effective charity that would save a child's life abroad. Psychologically, the single, identifiable victim right in front of us triggers a powerful, visceral response. The distant, statistical victim feels abstract, and our motivation diffuses. The paradox is a failure of moral scaling. Our ethical instincts are personal, immediate, and emotional, not statistical or global. This identifiable victim effect reveals a tragic inconsistency in our moral behavior. We are wired to be heroes in a spotlight, but often bystanders in a crowd. It asks, if we accept the principle that saving a life is good, why does the mechanism of saving so drastically alter our commitment to it? A man builds a time machine. He goes back in time and gives his younger self the detailed blueprints for the time machine. The younger self then uses those blueprints to build it. The question, where did the design for the time machine originate? It was never invented, it just exists in a closed causal loop. This is different from changing the past. It's about an item or information with no point of creation. The implications are mind-bending. If you used the machine to go back and teach Shakespeare his plays, then who was the author? The universe contains the plays, but no act of original composition ever occurred. It suggests a kind of Platonic realm where certain ideas simply are, and time travel just reveals their eternal existence in a twisted way. How can an analysis be both correct and informative? If we analyze the concept bachelor as unmarried man, and this is correct, then it seems we are just saying unmarried man is unmarried man, which is trivial. But if the analysis is informative, it seems we are adding something new, suggesting it might not be perfectly correct. This meta-paradox, from philosopher G.E. Moore, strikes at the heart of philosophical and dictionary definitions. It asks, what do we actually learn from a good definition? The answer may be that we learn the connections between concepts within our network of understanding. A good analysis doesn't just repeat, it situates and connects, revealing the synonymy that was implicit but not yet consciously linked. It is the paradox of making the implicit explicit. The statement, all ravens are black, is logically supported by observing a black raven. But it is also logically equivalent to, all non-black things are non-ravens. Therefore, observing a green apple, a non-black thing that is a non-raven, also supports the statement. This feels wrong. The resolution involves understanding that while the green apple provides some support, it is infinitesimally small compared to the support from a black raven, because the class of non-black things is vastly larger than the class of ravens. The paradox exposes the gulf between logical symmetry and psychological evidential weight. A green apple does technically confirm that all ravens are black, but in a way so dilute as to be practically meaningless. Our intuition conflates practical relevance with logical force. The moving spotlight theory tries to reconcile two views of time: the static block universe, where past, present, and future all exist, and our dynamic experience of a moving now. It posits that a spotlight of presentness moves along the static block. But then we must ask, how fast does the spotlight move? It would have to move at a rate of 1 second per second, which is not a rate at all, but a tautology. The paradox highlights the difficulty of locating the subjective experience of temporal flow within an objective physical model. What is the now made of? The spotlight is a metaphor that, when examined, seems to require its own time dimension, leading to an infinite regress. The feeling of passage remains stubbornly resistant to physical description. Philosopher Alfred North Whitehead posed a deceptively simple scenario. The cat is on the mat. Now, is the cat's being on the mat an event in the life of the cat, or an event in the life of the mat? Or is it a relation between two substances? Or is it a single, unified event that includes both cat and mat? The paradox lies in the difficulty of pinning down where and what an event is. Our language slices the world into subjects and objects, verbs and relations, but reality may be a seamless web of interconnected processes. The cat on the mat is a whole situation, a happening. Trying to assign its ontological home to the cat, the mat, or between them, reveals how our grammatical habits may mislead us about the nature of existence. When a natural phenomenon is unexplained, some attribute it to divine action. As science advances, explaining more and more, the domain of divine action shrinks into the gaps of our knowledge. The paradox is that this makes God a receding pocket of scientific ignorance, a deity who is most present where we are most ignorant. This is theologically problematic, as it sets faith on a collision course with discovery, guaranteeing its eventual irrelevance. A more robust theology might place God not in the gaps of natural law, but as the foundation and sustainer of natural law itself. The paradox is a cautionary tale about using the supernatural as a temporary explanatory placeholder, for it builds a faith that is eroded by the very progress of human understanding. Consider the claim, all statements are false. If this statement is true, then it itself must be false, so it can't be true. Therefore, it is false. But if it is false, then it's not the case that all statements are false. Some statements must be true. So its falsehood is consistent. The statement is self-refuting, its truth leads to a contradiction, so it can only be false. This is the fate of all universal skeptical claims, like, there is no truth, or all language is meaningless. To assert them meaningfully is to undermine them. They act as logical suicide bombers. This paradox provides a powerful tool. Any worldview that, if true, would make its own assertion impossible, can be dismissed on purely logical grounds. It is reason's immune system. A teacher announces, there will be a surprise exam next week. A student reasons, it can't be Friday, because if Thursday ends with no exam, I'll know it's Friday, and so eliminates each day, concluding it's impossible. The exam on Wednesday is a surprise. The logical error is subtle. The teacher's statement is a performative speech act, not a logical axiom. The student's reasoning changes the conditions of surprise from epistemic, I don't know which day, to metalogical, I cannot deduce the day from the statement itself. The paradox thrives on conflating these levels. It's a reminder that statements about knowledge and belief can create feedback loops where the act of reasoning about them alters the very state they describe. How can we talk about things that don't exist? We can say, Pegasus is a winged horse, or Sherlock Holmes lived on Baker Street. These statements seem meaningful and true about their subjects, yet their subjects have no real-world referent. Do Pegasus and Sherlock Holmes then refer to something? To ideas? To possible objects? This is the paradox of intentionality. Our minds can be about things that are not real. It suggests that the realm of meaning is not limited to the realm of existence. Our thoughts can wander in a landscape populated by fictions, illusions, and mere possibilities, and still make coherent sense. Language and thought are not mirrors of reality, but constructors of possible worlds. A man is asked why he is digging a hole. To plant a tree, he says. Why plant a tree? For the shade. Why do you want shade? To sit comfortably. Why sit comfortably? To read. Why read? To learn. Why learn? The questions could continue until we reach a final answer, to be happy, or just because. This reveals a paradox. Every purposeful action finds its justification in a further purpose, leading to an infinite regress or an arbitrary stopping point. Either our chain of purposes never ends, or it ends in a purpose that is valued for its own sake, an intrinsic good. But can anything truly be an intrinsic good, or is it just where we, arbitrarily, stop asking why? Our lives are networks of purpose that ultimately rest on a foundation of what? Habit. Biology. Choice. Your brain is floating in a vat of nutrients, connected to a supercomputer that perfectly simulates all sensory inputs of a normal life. Everything you experience, this room, your body, your memories, is an elaborate simulation. Can you know you are not a brain in a vat? Philosopher Hilary Putnam offered a linguistic twist. If you were a brain in a vat, your word vat would refer to virtual vats in the simulation, not real ones. So the statement, I am a brain in a vat, would be false, since you'd be a simulated brain in a simulated vat. The paradox becomes self-undermining. It is a deep, technical argument that suggests radical skepticism might be internally incoherent. Even the doubt requires a connection to reality that the doubt itself severs. We know one grain isn't a heap. We know adding one grain to a non-heap doesn't make a heap. Yet, we end with a heap. One solution is to reject the second premise. There is a precise cutoff, but we don't know it. But this seems absurd. Another is to accept vagueness as a real feature of the world and logic. But then we face a higher-order paradox. Is the concept of a heap itself vague? Is the boundary between vague and precise itself vague? We tumble into an endless regress of metavagueness. The Sorites paradox isn't just about heaps, it's a mirror held up to the fuzzy edges of all our concepts, showing that the fuzziness might go all the way down, with no solid core of precise meaning to be found. A perfect prediction machine prints out a card with your future action. You read it. Do you now have free will to disobey it? If you try, your attempt to disobey might be what was predicted. The machine seems to rob you of libertarian free will, the ability to do otherwise. But a compatibilist might say your freedom is about acting according to your desires, and the machine simply knows what your desires will cause you to do. The paradox forces us to choose. Either the machine's existence proves the future is fixed, determinism, or the machine is impossible because the future is open. It is a concrete version of the free will debate. The box turns an abstract philosophical problem into a tangible, disquieting object whose very existence would reshape our understanding of ourselves. 3 guests pay $30 for a $25 hotel room. The clerk realizes the error, gives $5 to the bellhop to return. The bellhop keeps $2, gives $1 back to each guest. So, each guest paid $9. $9 x 3 equals $27. The bellhop has $2. That's $29. Where is the missing dollar? The paradox is an accounting trick. The $27 the guests paid includes the $25 for the room, and the $2 the bellhop kept. Adding the bellhop's $2 to the $27 double counts it. The correct sum is $27, paid, equals $25, room, plus $2, stolen. The missing dollar never existed. It's an illusion created by adding the wrong numbers together. It's a lesson in how framing a problem can mislead even simple arithmetic, teaching us to trace the flow of money, not juggle meaningless totals. Zeno's paradox assumes space and time are infinitely divisible. But what if they are discrete, composed of tiny, indivisible quanta, like pixels or Planck units. Then Achilles would simply jump from one quantum to the next, eventually passing the tortoise with no infinite steps. The paradox then transforms. It becomes an argument about the fundamental fabric of reality. Is the universe continuous and smooth, or grainy and pixelated? Our best physics suggests spacetime might indeed be quantized at the Planck scale. Zeno's ancient mind game thus points to a profound modern question about the nature of physical reality. The paradox isn't just wrong, it's a clue. It asks us to choose between an infinitely deep continuum and a universe with a fundamental resolution. As you fall into a black hole, from your perspective, you cross the event horizon smoothly. But to a distant observer watching you, you appear to slow down, redden, and fade, never quite reaching the horizon. Who is right? Both, according to their own reference frames. General relativity allows for such irreconcilable perspectives. There is no single privileged now across vast distances in curved spacetime. The paradox is that two observers can have permanently divergent accounts of the same event, one where you are destroyed, one where you continue. This isn't an illusion, it's a consequence of the relativity of simultaneity taken to an extreme. The black hole becomes a factory of objective, yet mutually inaccessible, realities. It is a cosmic lesson in perspectival absolutism. Two players are interrupted in a winner-take-all game. How should the prize be split fairly? In the 17th century, this led Blaise Pascal and Pierre de Fermat to invent probability theory. The paradox was that intuition failed. The fair split isn't based on the current score alone, but on the probability each had of winning from that point. This shifted thinking from deterministic fairness to probabilistic expectation. It showed that rational decision-making under uncertainty requires a mathematics of future possibilities, not just past events. It transformed gambling from superstition into a branch of mathematics and laid the groundwork for insurance, finance, and modern science. A simple gambling dispute birthed the tool we use to navigate a risky world. Assuming you are a random human among all humans who will ever live, simple statistics suggest it's unlikely you'd find yourself in the very earliest fraction of humanity's timeline. If humans survive for millions of years, the number of future humans is vast, making your current birth position improbably early. Therefore, it's more likely that the total number of humans who will ever live is not vast, implying an early end to our species. This statistical argument, while controversial, is chilling. It uses your own position in time as evidence about humanity's future. It turns the Copernican principle, "you are not special," into a predictor of doom. Whether it's sound or a trick of reasoning, it forces a statistical perspective on our collective fate that feels deeply unnatura. Philosopher John Rawls proposed a thought experiment to design a just society. Decide its rules from behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing your own future place in it, your race, gender, talents, or wealth. The paradox is that this imagined ignorance is meant to lead to fairness, but it requires us to abandon the very self-interest that usually drives our decisions. It asks us to choose principles as if we were anyone, which ultimately means considering the worst-off position most carefully. The veil transforms justice from a negotiation between competing interests into a rational exercise in risk aversion for an unknown future self. It is a paradox because it uses the elimination of personal identity as the tool to discover what is personally fair. People might prefer lottery A to lottery B when asked to choose, but then place a higher monetary value on lottery B when asked to bid for it. This inconsistent behavior violates the axioms of rational choice theory. The paradox reveals that our preferences are not stable, pre-existing things. They are constructed in the moment, depending on how the question is asked, the elicitation method. Are we choosing or pricing? The context changes our mental accounting. This undermines the model of humans as consistent utility maximizers. We are not revealing a hidden preference. We are creating one on the spot, influenced by frames, anchors, and emotions. Our economic self is a shapeshifter, not a calculator. Imagine a setup where a photon can take two paths to a screen, creating an interference pattern that proves it behaved like a wave. If you place detectors to see which path it took, the pattern vanishes, the photon acts like a particle. Now, add a quantum eraser, a mechanism that, after the photon has hit the screen, can erase the which path information. Astonishingly, the interference pattern can reappear, even though the decision to erase or not is made after the photon has already been detected. This seems to imply that a future choice, to erase or keep the information, can retroactively influence the past behavior of the photon. The resolution is subtle but profound. The erased pattern only appears when you correlate specific late-arriving photons with the choice made at the eraser. It's not that the past changes, it's that our knowledge of the past is entangled with a future measurement. The paradox dissolves into a lesson about quantum non-locality and the inseparability of a system's history from the context of its final observation. It reveals a universe where what happened isn't absolute, but relational, dependent on what question you finally decide to ask. The photon's past is not a fixed timeline, but a shimmering set of potentialities that only crystallize into a specific story when the entire experimental narrative, from emission to final measurement, is complete. This challenges our deepest notions of causality and time, suggesting that at the quantum level, the universe keeps its options open in a way that feels, to our classically wired brains, like history being rewritten. Consider this statement: if this statement is true, then God exists. Now, assume the statement is true. Then, what it asserts must be true. Namely, that if the statement is true, then God exists. But we just assumed it's true, so we can conclude, God exists. Therefore, we have proved God exists from the mere assumption of the statement's truth. This is a simplified version of a deeper logical paradox related to Gödel's incompleteness theorems. It exposes the strange power of self-reference in formal systems. The statement, by hooking its own truth to a conclusion, creates a logical shortcut. If it's true, it forces the conclusion. If it's false, then the if-then structure is vacuously true. A false premise implies anything, making the statement true again. It's a logical trap. This kind of paradox demonstrates that truth-telling systems powerful enough to talk about themselves can generate sentences that are true, but unprovable within the system, or that force unexpected conclusions. It's the bedrock of modern logic, showing that no consistent system of arithmetic can prove its own consistency. The paradox whispers that the fabric of logic itself contains knots that cannot be fully smoothed out from within, imposing a fundamental limit on what any formal system, or perhaps any mind, can completely know about itself. The Buddha taught anatta, or non-self. This is the doctrine that what we call the self, a permanent, unchanging, independent entity, is an illusion. Instead, what we are is a temporary, ever-changing aggregate, skandha, of physical form, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. The paradox arises immediately. If there is no self, who is it that is experiencing this, who suffers, who seeks enlightenment, and who attains nirvana? The teaching is not nihilism. It doesn't say there is nothing. It says the self is a process, not a thing. It's like a river. You can point to it, name it, but you cannot isolate a permanent river entity separate from the flowing water, the banks, and the movement itself. The suffering, dukkha, comes from clinging to the illusion of a fixed self, from trying to make this transient process permanent. The realization of anatta is thus a liberation from this futile struggle. The paradox is resolved through direct meditative insight, not intellectual argument. You observe the arising and passing of all phenomena, including thoughts and feelings, and see no stable controller or owner behind them. You are the watching itself, not a thing that watches. This turns the conventional understanding of identity inside out, replacing a noun with a verb, a static entity with a dynamic, interdependent flow. It is perhaps the most radical and profound brain twister of all. The direct inquiry into the seeker reveals that the seeker is what is being sought, and that its apparent solidity is the root of all existential unease. Jorge Luis Borges imagined a vast, perhaps infinite, library containing every possible 410-page book that can be composed from a set of orthographic characters. This means it holds every great work of literature in every language, every true account of history, every scientific discovery, and every future prophecy. But it also contains, in vastly greater numbers, every possible nonsensical variation. Books of pure gibberish, books that are almost correct but with a single fatal error, and every vile, blasphemous, or insane text conceivable. The paradox lies in the total devaluation of meaning. In a universe where every truth exists alongside every possible falsehood, and where the true books are lost in a sea of chaotic permutations, knowledge becomes impossible to locate or verify. The library is total information, which is equivalent to total noise. It is a metaphor for the cosmos, the internet, and the human mind, a space of near-infinite combinatorial possibility where the search for significance is both necessary and potentially absurd. The librarians wander the hexagons, some driven mad by the near certainty that the truth is somewhere but utterly inaccessible, others worshipping the meaningless books as divine. The library embodies the terror and splendor of infinity. It promises everything, but in doing so, renders any individual thing cosmically insignificant. It is the ultimate paradox of plenitude, where having all possibilities annihilates the value of any single one. The physicist John Archibald Wheeler proposed a stunning vision. The universe only comes into concrete existence through the act of observation by conscious beings. He illustrated this with his delayed choice experiment, an extension of the double slit. A photon's decision to act as a wave or particle can be made after it has traversed the apparatus, based on how we choose to measure it. Wheeler took this further, suggesting that observations made by beings now could retroactively determine events that occurred billions of years ago, like the path of a photon from a distant quasar. This is the participatory anthropic principle. We are not just passive observers of a pre-existing cosmos, but participants in bringing it into being. The universe generated the conditions for life, and life, through observation, gives specific reality to the universe's past. It's a cosmic version of the "if a tree falls" paradox, with a breathtaking scale. The paradox is a profound chicken and egg loop. Which came first, the universe or the observer? Wheeler's answer is neither. They co-create each other in a closed, self-excited circuit. The universe is a grand it from bit phenomenon, where information, the bit, shaped by observation gives rise to the physical it. This view blurs the line between mind and matter, physics and philosophy, suggesting that consciousness is not a minor byproduct of the cosmos, but a fundamental feature of its structure and history. Reporting on the trial of Nazi official Adolf Eichmann, philosopher Hannah Arendt coined the phrase, the banality of evil. She expected to see a monstrous, fanatical ideologue, but instead encountered a dull, cliché-ridden bureaucrat who claimed he was merely following orders and doing his job. The paradox is that great evil can be committed not by monsters, but by ordinary people who abdicate moral thought and critical judgment in favor of administrative efficiency and obedience to authority. Eichmann was not driven by deep hatred. He was driven by a desire for career advancement and a frighteningly normal inability to think from the standpoint of others. This flips the script on our understanding of evil. The greatest dangers may not come from those who consciously choose evil, but from those who never make a conscious moral choice at all, who simply function within a system, turning human beings into abstractions and statistics. The paradox lies in the disconnect between the terrifying magnitude of the acts and the mundane, thoughtless psychology of the actor. It suggests that the antidote to evil is not necessarily heroic virtue, but the common, cultivated habit of thinking critically, of refusing to be a cog, of maintaining the imaginative capacity to see the humanity in others. It makes morality not a grand battle, but a daily, disciplined practice of engagement. Psychological research shows that after major positive or negative life events, winning the lottery or becoming paralyzed, people tend to return to a relatively stable baseline level of happiness after a period of time. This is the hedonic treadmill. We adapt to new circumstances, so the pursuit of external goods for happiness is like running on a treadmill. We exert great effort but don't get closer to a lasting destination. The paradox is that our brain's very ability to adapt, which is a survival asset for coping with hardship, also sabotages our quest for lasting joy from achievement or acquisition. We chase the new car, the promotion, the perfect relationship, believing they will bring permanent elevation, only to find ourselves acclimating and desiring the next thing. The implication is radical. Sustainable happiness must come from sources that are not subject to adaptation, from intrinsic activities like personal growth, flow states, mindfulness, and connection, rather than from extrinsic rewards. The treadmill teaches that the engine of desire is insatiable by design. To step off the treadmill is not to stop running, but to change the terrain, to find joy in the process of running itself, in the feeling of the wind, the rhythm of breath, rather than in a finish line that perpetually recedes. Why do we voluntarily seek out and derive satisfaction from art that portrays suffering and tragedy? Watching King Lear or a heartbreaking film is an experience of negative emotions, sadness, pity, fear. Yet we leave feeling enriched, even elevated, not merely depressed. This is the classical paradox of tragedy. Philosophers have proposed various solutions. Aristotle's catharsis, where we purge these emotions in a safe setting. David Hume's idea of the conversion of pain into pleasure through the brilliance of the artistic representation, or the modern concept that such stories allow us to simulate and process deep human experiences, affirming our empathy and shared humanity. The paradox highlights a unique feature of aesthetic experience. It allows for a kind of meta-emotion, where we can feel sadness at a distance, and simultaneously feel pleasure at our own capacity to feel and understand that sadness. It's a safe exploration of the existential edges of life. This capacity to find meaning and even a strange beauty in represented sorrow is a cornerstone of civilization. It suggests that our emotional lives are not simply about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, but about seeking coherence, understanding, and depth, even when, or especially when, that depth is carved from the material of suffering. The argument states, 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. The paradox emerges in defending premise 2 against the idea of an infinite past. Can an infinite series of past events actually exist? Philosophers like Al-Ghazali argued it cannot, using thought experiments like Hilbert's Hotel for time. If the past is infinite, then an infinite number of events has already occurred. But an actual infinite, they claim, leads to absurdities, like the impossibility of reaching the present moment by traversing an infinite number of prior moments. You cannot cross an infinite distance by successive addition. Therefore, the past must be finite, the universe must have begun to exist. This is a paradox of the infinite applied to time itself. Modern cosmology, with the Big Bang Theory, provides a scientific correlate. But the philosophical puzzle remains deep. Is an infinite regress of causes logically coherent, or is it a conceptual void? The argument forces a choice between an uncaused beginning, a brute fact, or an infinite causal chain with no first member, which many find equally baffling. It is the ultimate why is there something rather than nothing question, formalized into a logical structure that leaves the intellect teetering on the edge of both options, unsatisfied. Why is an original painting, like the Mona Lisa, valued inestimably higher than a perfect, molecule-for-molecule replica? The physical visual experience could be identical. Philosopher Walter Benjamin called this the aura of the original. Its unique existence in time and space, its history of ownership, the trace of the artist's hand. The paradox is that we imbue an object with immense value based on non-perceptible, historical relational properties. The value is not in the thing as seen, but in the thing as a witness. It's a testament to our belief in a unique chain of causality connecting us to a singular moment of creation. This preference contradicts a purely utilitarian or aesthetic valuation. The replica, no matter how perfect, is a branch cut from that historical tree. The original is the tree. This extends beyond art to relics, heirlooms, and even places. It reveals that our relationship to objects is often not about their function or immediate properties, but about the stories they anchor and the authenticity they represent in a world of copies. In an age of digital reproduction and potential simulation, this paradox becomes acute. What is lost when the aura disappears? Perhaps we lose a tangible connection to history, to uniqueness, and to the irreversible flow of time itself, which the original has endured and the replica has not. It is the human heart's rebellion against pure fungibility, a longing for the singular and the irreplaceable in a universe that science often reveals to be made of interchangeable parts. The economist William Stanley Jevons observed a counterintuitive phenomenon in 19th-century Britain. As steam engines became more efficient and used less coal per unit of work, the total consumption of coal across the country increased, not decreased. This is the Jevons paradox, a foundational concept in ecological economics that states, increases in the efficiency of resource use often lead to an overall increase in the consumption of that resource, not a decrease, because the improved efficiency lowers the effective cost and encourages broader and more intensive use. The logic is deceptively simple. Imagine a new, ultra-efficient light bulb that uses 90% less energy. Your immediate thought is that this will drastically cut your electricity bill. And for a single bulb, it does. But the paradox emerges at the systemic, societal level. The dramatic reduction in the cost of illumination, you get more light for far less money, can lead to a cascade of new behaviors. People light more areas of their homes, for longer periods. Municipalities install brighter streetlights. Advertising signs proliferate. New applications for light are invented that were previously deemed too expensive. The demand for the service, illumination, skyrockets because its price, in energy and cost, has plummeted, and this surge in demand can outpace the per-unit efficiency gains, leading to a net rise in total energy use. This paradox is not just a historical curiosity about coal, it is a profound and active dilemma in our modern sustainability efforts. We see it with fuel-efficient cars. Lowering the cost per mile of driving can encourage people to drive more, live farther from work, suburban sprawl, and ultimately increase total fuel consumption and traffic congestion. We see it with digital data. As storage and bandwidth become cheaper and more efficient, we generate and consume exponentially more data, with massive attendant energy costs in data centers. The Jevons paradox is a brutal check on technological optimism. It tells us that relying solely on efficiency gains to solve resource depletion or pollution is a naive strategy, because it ignores the complex feedback loops of human economics and desire. It forces us to consider that real conservation might require not just smarter tools, but a fundamental re-evaluation of consumption patterns, perhaps incorporating systemic constraints like absolute caps on resource use, cap-and-trade systems, or a cultural shift away from the relentless expansion of demand. It is the paradox where doing better with less inadvertently convinces us to use more of everything, a lesson in the unintended consequences of progress that echoes through our efforts to build a sustainable future. Pause here and consider the efficient appliances in your life. Have they truly reduced your footprint, or have they quietly licensed an expansion of your consumption? We cannot tell. The chemist and philosopher Michael Polanyi articulated a profound truth with his simple maxim, we know more than we can tell. This is the Polanyi paradox, and it points to the vast, subterranean realm of tacit knowledge that underpins all expertise, skill, and even basic human interaction. Explicit knowledge is what can be articulated, codified, written down in manuals or formulas, the what. Tacit knowledge is the unspoken, often unconscious, understanding of how, the intuitive feel, the embodied skill, the contextual judgment, the unformalized knack. Think of riding a bicycle. You can read a 1,000-page manual on physics, gyroscopes, and balance, but it will not grant you the ability to ride. The knowledge is in the doing, in the body's subtle adjustments, in the feel of the lean and the turn. This knowledge is transferred not through textbooks, but through demonstration, apprenticeship, imitation, and practice. A master craftsman cannot fully articulate the precise pressure and angle of a chisel that distinguishes a good cut from a ruined piece of wood. It is in their hands. A doctor develops a clinical eye, a gestalt sense of a patient's illness that goes beyond the checklist of symptoms. The paradox has staggering implications, especially in the age of artificial intelligence. Much of the early optimism in AI assumed that if we could simply codify the rules of expert decision-making, we could automate it. The Polanyi paradox suggests a fundamental limit. If the experts themselves cannot fully articulate the deep, tacit dimensions of their knowledge, then we cannot program it into a machine. This is why tasks that are easy for humans, like recognizing a face, understanding sarcasm, or navigating a cluttered room, were historically so hard for AI. and why they required a shift from rule-based programming to machine learning on vast datasets, a process that, in a way, tries to infer the tacit patterns directly. The paradox also challenges the management of organizations. Valuable institutional knowledge often resides in the tacit skills of experienced employees, and when they leave, that knowledge evaporates if it hasn't been transferred through shared experience. Ultimately, the Polanyi paradox is a humbling reminder of the depth and ineffability of human intelligence. Our conscious, verbal mind is just the tip of an enormous iceberg of knowing, rooted in our bodies, our senses, our social interactions, and our lived history. It celebrates the artisan over the instruction manual, the mentor over the lecture, and suggests that true wisdom will always retain an element of the inexpressible, a silent competence that whispers just below the level of words. We previously introduced this as the family trip to Abilene, but its depths and societal ramifications merit a much deeper dive. The Abilene paradox, formulated by management expert Jerry B. Harvey, describes the counterproductive tendency of groups to unanimously agree on a course of action that is actually contrary to the preferences of each individual member. It is a pathology of agreement, not disagreement. The mechanism is a vicious cycle of misperception and fear. Each member privately believes their own preference is out of step with the perceived group consensus. To avoid being seen as a troublemaker, a spoilsport, or disloyal, they suppress their objection and even voice support for the option they think others want. This creates a false, reinforcing signal of agreement, pulling the group inexorably toward a decision nobody genuinely desires. The fuel for this paradox is anxiety about conflict, the desire to preserve superficial harmony at the expense of authentic dialogue and good outcomes. This is far more than a parable about a bad family outing. It is the hidden engine behind countless corporate blunders, failed government policies, and toxic team dynamics. A board of directors might approve a disastrous merger because no one wants to appear pessimistic or question the CEO's enthusiasm. A software team might commit to an impossible deadline because each engineer, seeing others nod, assumes the timeline must be feasible. A committee might design a convoluted policy that satisfies no one because each member adds a compromise clause they dislike, thinking it's important to others. The paradox is especially dangerous because it leaves no visible dissent to analyze afterward. The failure appears as a unanimous error, mystifying to all. The antidote is a culture of psychological safety, where dissent is not just tolerated but actively solicited. Techniques like devil's advocacy, anonymous feedback, or a pre-mortem, imagine this project has failed, why did it happen, can pierce the illusion of consensus. The Abilene paradox teaches that silence is not agreement, it is often the breeding ground for collective folly. It warns us that the smoothest, most conflict-free meeting might be the one steering the organization directly off a cliff, and that true consensus requires the courage to voice the uncomfortable no that, to your surprise, others may have been silently longing to hear. That obscures the territory. This is an epistemological paradox that emerges from our very need to understand the world. To know anything in depth, we must focus on specific details, but this act of focusing inevitably excludes other details, potentially distorting the whole. The philosopher Alfred Korzybski famously said, "The map is not the territory." A map is a magnificent tool precisely because it is a reduction. It omits almost everything: the texture of the bark on every tree, the smell of the air, the feeling of the gravel underfoot, to highlight a few specific features like roads, elevation, and political boundaries. This is useful, even essential. The paradox arises when we confuse the map for the territory, when our specific, focused model of reality, be it a scientific theory, an ideology, a professional specialization, or a personal belief system, becomes so ingrained that we forget what it leaves out, and we start to force the messy, complex territory to conform to our clean, specific map. We see this everywhere. In medicine, a specialist may see a liver or a knee, brilliantly understanding its specific mechanics but potentially missing how the patient's lifestyle, psychology, or social environment contributes to the illness, the territory of the whole person. In economics, a model based on rational actors can make specific, elegant predictions but fail catastrophically when the territory of human irrationality and herd psychology erupts, as in market crashes. In interpersonal conflicts, each person holds a specific, detailed map of the event that highlights their own hurts and justifies their actions, while completely omitting the other's perspective. The shared territory of the relationship becomes a battleground of competing, incomplete maps. The paradox warns against the idolatry of expertise and the arrogance of any single perspective. It advocates for a kind of intellectual humility and synthesis. The need to consult multiple maps, different disciplines, viewpoints, scales of analysis, to get a richer, though never complete, sense of the territory. It suggests that ultimate truth may be inherently unspecific. A gestalt, a pattern that connects, which recedes the closer we try to pin it down with our precise, and therefore inherently limited, tools of understanding. Plato's dialogue Meno presents one of the oldest and most elegant epistemological paradoxes. Socrates, questioning a slave boy about geometry, leads him to a truth the boy did not know he knew. Meno then poses the challenge: how will you look for something when you don't in the least know what it is? How on earth are you going to set up something you don't know as the object of your search? To put it another way, even if you come right up against it, how will you know that what you have found is the thing you didn't know? In short, if you know what you're looking for, inquiry is unnecessary. If you don't know what you're looking for, inquiry is impossible. Therefore, all learning and discovery seem logically incoherent. Socrates' answer is his theory of anamnesis, or recollection. The soul is immortal and has already learned all truths. What we call learning is actually remembering what the soul already knows. While this metaphysical answer is particular to Plato, the paradox itself points to a deep structure of cognition. Modern responses illuminate it further. One is the concept of prior knowledge and scaffolding. You never inquire from a state of total ignorance. You have a rough, fuzzy, or analogous idea that guides your search. You know you're looking for the cause of the disease, even if you don't know the specific pathogen. The process of inquiry refines this fuzzy concept. Another is Karl Popper's view. We start with a conjecture, a guess, a hypothesis, a problem, and then we attempt to refute it through criticism and experiment. We don't search blindly, we propose possible worlds and then see if they collapse under the weight of evidence. Cognitive science also speaks to this. Our brains are pattern recognition engines that make probabilistic predictions. Learning is the updating of these predictive models based on error signals. Meno's paradox ultimately dissolves when we realize that knowledge is not a binary state of ignorance or full comprehension, but a continuum. Inquiry is the process of moving along that continuum, guided by hunches, questions, metaphors, and failed attempts. The paradox's power lies in exposing the seeming miracle of genuine discovery, that moment of eureka, where something truly new emerges in the mind. It suggests that the seed of the answer must somehow be latent in the structure of the question, and that the journey of learning is a dance between the known and the unknown, where each step into the unknown is only possible because of the ground of the known we stand upon. It makes every act of curiosity a minor philosophical triumph over logical impossibility. Our earlier discussion of water and diamonds revealed the marginalist solution. But the evolution of this paradox in the digital age opens new, even more mind-bending chapters. The classical paradox asked why essential things, water, are cheap while frivolous things, diamonds, are expensive. Marginal utility solved it. But now consider, why are digital goods that require immense initial investment, a blockbuster movie, a software program, often sold at near zero marginal cost, or even given away, while simple physical goods, a bottle of water, a handmade chair, retain tangible cost? This is the paradox of value in an economy of abundance, replication, and networks. The cost structure of a digital good is all up front, the first copy, and nearly zero thereafter, the millionth copy. This decouples price from marginal cost entirely. Value is now determined by different, often paradoxical, rules. Network effects: a social media platform is worthless alone, priceless with a billion users. Attention economics: the good is free, you and your attention are the product. Versioning and tiering: a basic version is free to create demand for a premium version. And intellectual property law: artificial scarcity enforced by copyright. We see goods with infinite supply, digital music, that can generate vast wealth, and physical goods with limited supply, land in a city, that become astronomically expensive. Furthermore, value becomes tied to experiences and status more than pure utility. People pay thousands for a concert experience, non-replicable, but balk at paying $10 for the album, infinitely replicable. They pay a premium for a brand logo, a social signal, on a t-shirt. This new landscape creates its own paradoxes. The most widely used and valuable software in the world, like certain open-source protocols or Wikipedia, is created and maintained largely by volunteers, not directly for market gain. Value is captured in indirect, ecosystemic ways. The paradox teaches us that value is not an intrinsic property of an object, nor even just a function of its marginal utility in a static market. It is a dynamic, social, and systemic phenomenon. In the digital realm, value is often a story we tell about access, community, identity, and time. The bottle of water's value is in its atoms, the software's value is in its bits and the connections those bits facilitate. We have moved from an economy of scarcity, where paradoxes were about allocation, to an economy of abundance, where the paradoxes are about attention, meaning, and the very nature of ownership itself. Hempel's raven paradox feels like a trick, but engaging with it fully opens a portal into the heart of scientific reasoning. The statement, all ravens are black, is logically equivalent to its contrapositive, all non-black things are non-ravens. Therefore, logically, a green apple confirms the second statement, and thus the first. Our intuition rebels. The resolution involves sophisticated tools from probability and the philosophy of science. First, Bayesian confirmation theory. Evidence E confirms hypothesis H if the probability of H given E is higher than the prior probability of H. Seeing a black raven dramatically increases the probability that all ravens are black, because black ravens are a large portion of what the hypothesis is about. Seeing a green apple increases the probability only infinitesimally, because the class of non-black things is so astronomically vast that finding one non-black non-raven barely shifts the needle. Second, the concept of projectability and natural kinds. Not all logically equivalent statements are confirmed by the same evidence in practice. All ravens are black is a law-like statement about a natural kind, ravens. All non-black things are non-ravens is a grotesquely disjunctive, unnatural category. Scientific confirmation cares about natural kinds and causal connections, not just logical form. We test hypotheses by examining instances of the subject category, ravens, not by examining the infinite universe of irrelevant objects. The paradox also highlights background knowledge. We already know that apples are not ravens, and their color is determined by entirely different biological processes. The green apple provides no relevant new information about the color biology of corvids. A piece of evidence must be relevant to the causal mechanism proposed by the hypothesis. So, the paradox stands as a permanent lesson. Formal logic alone is an insufficient guide to scientific practice. Scientific reasoning is a messy, context-dependent blend of logic, probability, background knowledge, and judgments about relevance and natural kinds. The green apple does provide a minuscule, technical amount of confirmation, but to treat it as equally significant as a black raven is to miss the entire point of how we build knowledge about the world. It's a beautiful demonstration of the gap between the pristine world of symbols and the grubby, specific, causal world that science investigates. We can delve far deeper into this ancient puzzle. The ship of Theseus isn't just about planks, it's a probe into the nature of identity over time. Let's construct a modern, layered version. Imagine the ship is a NASA space probe on a centuries-long voyage. As it travels, its parts fail and are replaced by robotic drones with new, maybe even technologically superior, components. After 500 years, not a single original atom remains. Is it still the Voyager? Our intuition, based on spatio-temporal continuity, the unbroken history of the ship function, says yes. Now, imagine a fanatic collector back on Earth, who has been intercepting the discarded original parts shipped back by the drones and has, over the centuries, painstakingly reassembled them. That ship, made of all the original parts, now sits in a museum. Which is the real Voyager? The museum piece has material continuity but no functional history. The spacefaring vessel has historical continuity but no original material. This forces us to ask, what is the essence of the ship? Is it its stuff or its story? We face the same question with our bodies, complete cellular replacement every 7 to 10 years, with our minds, constantly changing memories and personality, with institutions, and with digital entities. A more radical step is to consider the ship as information or pattern. The philosopher Derek Parfit used thought experiments like this to argue that what matters in personal identity is not a deep, metaphysical self, but psychological connectedness and continuity, the overlapping chain of memories, intentions, and character traits. The ship of Theseus, then, is the pattern of being a ship that explores. The pattern persists in the functional vessel, even as its substrate changes. The museum ship is a static snapshot of an old substrate, but the pattern of exploration has left it. This patternist view aligns with how we think of many things today. A university is not its original buildings or founders, but the enduring pattern of scholarship and community. A company is not its original capital, but its brand, processes, and culture. The paradox ultimately suggests that identity is not a thing to be found, but a process to be sustained. It is a verb masquerading as a noun. We are not statues enduring through time. We are flames, constantly consuming new fuel, maintaining a recognizable shape while being never the same collection of particles from one moment to the next. The ship is its sailing. Based on the second law of thermodynamics, the ultimate fate of an isolated universe is heat-death, or thermodynamic equilibrium. A state of maximum entropy where all energy is evenly distributed, no temperature differences exist, no stars shine, no complex structures can form, and therefore no life or thought is possible. It is the absolute, final erasure of all change and differentiation. A cosmic quietus. The paradox is this: if the universe is inevitably destined for a state of uniform, timeless oblivion where every trace of structure, memory, and meaning is erased, then what is the significance of anything that happens before that end? It seems to render all struggle, creation, love, art, and discovery cosmically futile, mere temporary fluctuations in the void, destined to be forgotten not just by history, but by existence itself. It is the ultimate version of existential dread, scaled to the universe. This paradox forces a fundamental philosophical choice. One response is cosmic nihilism. If the final state is null, then nothing ultimately matters. All meaning is a local, temporary illusion. Another is existential rebellion. Meaning is not conferred by eternal cosmic purpose, but created by conscious beings in spite of the void. The heat-death makes our finite, precious moments of experience all the more poignant and valuable. As Camus' Sisyphus must be imagined happy, we must find our meaning in the rolling of the stone, not in the hope it will ever stay atop the hill. A third, more speculative response draws from cosmology and philosophy of time. Some interpretations of eternal inflation or cyclic cosmologies suggest our universe may be one bubble in a multiverse with no final end. Others, like the poetic naturalism of Sean Carroll, argue that the universe doesn't have a purpose, but it has purposes, the ones we create. The heat-death is an inevitable process, but the emergence of complex, meaning-making creatures like us is also a natural consequence of the universe's laws in their youth. The deepest resolution may lie in rejecting the premise that meaning requires permanence. A sunset is not meaningless because it ends, its beauty is inextricable from its transience. A story is not worthless because it has a final page. The heat-death, impossibly far in the future, frames the entire cosmic story as a finite narrative. And within that narrative, our chapter, the brief flowering of consciousness in a medium of stars and planets, becomes the remarkable, perhaps even the most interesting part of the entire epic. The universe became aware of itself. For a fleeting moment, it wondered, loved, created, and asked questions about its own fate. That the story ends does not negate the story, it defines it. The heat-death is the silence that gives the symphony its shape. Pause, in this vast, cooling darkness, and feel the intense, defiant warmth of a single conscious thought. We have journeyed through 99 labyrinths of logic, perception, and existence. We arrive now at the meta-paradox that enfolds this entire endeavor. the search for answers that soothe the mind, conducted through ideas designed to unsettle it. This video promised paradoxes to blow your mind to sleep. That is itself a paradoxical instruction, to use intellectual stimulation, which typically awakens, as a lullaby. How can confusion be a path to peace? The resolution lies in the nature of the thinking mind. The mind, when left to its own devices, often spins on the anxieties of the day, the to-do lists, the personal narratives. It seeks resolution, conclusion, certainty. Paradoxes disarm this machinery. They present knots that cannot be neatly untied by our habitual, linear problem-solving. Faced with a true paradox, the analytical mind, after a valiant effort, must eventually let go. It must surrender to not knowing. It must rest in the question itself, not in the pursuit of an answer. This surrender is the gateway to a deeper relaxation. The relentless curiosity that drove us through these 100 levels is the very same energy that fuels insomnia. Paradoxes, by presenting irresolvable puzzles, act as a cognitive ground. They give the seeking mind a final, worthy opponent, itself. And in that stalemate, a quiet peace can emerge. The brain, having been led to the very edge of its conceptual map, gazing into the fog of the unknowable, can finally switch off its navigational systems. There is nowhere left to go in thought. So, we arrive here at the end. But is it an end? A video looped, or a mind returning to these ideas, creates a circle, not a line. The end connects back to the beginning. The final paradox is that in exploring 100 ways to confound the intellect, we may have secretly been practicing 100 forms of meditation. Each segment, a mantra of mystery, designed not to fill you with knowledge, but to empty you of the need for finality. The ultimate brain twister is that letting your mind be thoroughly twisted can, paradoxically, straighten out the knots of daily worry and lead you into a clear, open, and silent space. So, as this journey concludes, let the last paradox be your pillow. The more deeply you contemplate the incomprehensible, the more easily you may slip into the simple, wordless, and profound state of sleep. Good night.